The alarm screamed through the corridors of the Horizon's Promise, a sound that made every crew member's blood run cold. Daehyun Kim grabbed his rifle and sprinted toward the diplomatic wing, his boots pounding against the metal floor. The ship shuddered violently as another explosion rocked the hull. "All security personnel to stations." The captain's voice crackled over the comm system. "We are under attack by crash forces." "This is not a drill." Daehyun cursed under his breath. The Crash were notorious for their hatred of humans. They believed humanity had no place in the Galactic Coalition, and they were willing to kill to prove their point. But attacking a diplomatic vessel? That was an act of war. He rounded a corner and nearly collided with Lieutenant Park, who was bleeding from a gash on his forehead. "Kim, they've breached the lower decks. At least 30 hostiles, maybe more. They're using bioweapons. Where's Princess Hana?" "Still in the diplomatic suite. Her guards are with her, but another explosion cut him off." The lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency lighting. Daehyun didn't wait for more information. He ran toward the diplomatic wing, his mind racing. Princess Hana of the Valorn Empire was the most important passenger on this ship. If she died, the fragile peace between the Valorn and dozens of other species would shatter. Wars would start. Millions would die. The corridor ahead was filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Bodies lay scattered on the floor, both human crew members and Valorn guards. Daehyun checked each one as he passed, but none were alive. The crash had been thorough. He reached the diplomatic suite and found the entrance blown open. Inside, the scene was chaos. 4 Valorn guards lay dead, their insectoid bodies torn apart by weapons fire. Princess Hana stood in the center of the room, her forearms holding a ceremonial blade. She was wounded, green blood dripping from cuts on her thorax and upper arms. 3 Kresh soldiers surrounded her, their weapons raised. They were reptilian creatures, covered in thick scales that could deflect most small arms' fire. Their yellow eyes gleamed with malice. "Human," one of them hissed. "Stand aside or die with the bug." Daehyun raised his rifle. "I don't think so." He fired 3 quick bursts. The first 2 struck the nearest Kresh in the face, the only vulnerable spot on their bodies. The creature dropped without a sound. The other 2 turned toward him, giving Princess Hana the opening she needed. She lunged forward with surprising speed, her blade piercing through the second Kresh's throat. The third Kresh fired his weapon. Daehyun dove to the side, feeling the heat of the plasma bolt as it passed inches from his head. He rolled and came up firing, emptying half his magazine into the creature's face and neck. It staggered backward and fell. For a moment, there was silence except for the distant sounds of battle elsewhere on the ship. Princess Hana lowered her blade and looked at Daehyun with her large, multifaceted eyes. "You came back," she said. Her voice had a strange, chittering quality that human translators struggled to capture. "Your orders were to evacuate." "Yeah, well, I'm not very good at following orders." Daehyun checked his rifle's charge. "Can you move?" "I am injured, but functional." "We must." The wall exploded inward. More Kresh poured through the breach, at least a dozen of them. Daehyun grabbed Princess Hana and pulled her behind an overturned desk. Weapons fire tore through the room, shredding furniture and walls. "We can't fight them all," Hana shouted over the noise. Daehyun's mind worked frantically. They were trapped. The Kresh had them surrounded, and reinforcements wouldn't arrive in time. He glanced at the wall panel beside him and saw the reactor status display. An idea formed in his mind, a terrible, desperate idea. "I'm going to get you out of here," he said. "How? Do you trust me?" Princess Hana stared at him for a long moment. They barely knew each other. She was royalty of one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. He was a simple human soldier. By all logic, she should refuse. "Yes," she said. "I trust you." Dehan pulled out his combat knife and cut a long strip from his uniform. "When I say run, you run. Don't look back, don't stop. Get to escape pod 7. It's 3 corridors down, second on the left. Can you make it? Where will you be? Buying you time." He tied the strip around his hand and gripped his rifle. "Ready?" The Kresh were advancing, their weapons still firing. Dehan grabbed a smoke grenade from his belt and threw it. White smoke filled the room. He stood up and fired blindly into the smoke, then grabbed Princess Hana's arm. "Run! Now!" They burst from cover and sprinted toward the door. Dehan fired behind them, not aiming, just trying to keep the Kresh pinned down. They made it into the corridor, and Hana ran ahead, moving with the strange, skittering gait of her species. Dehan stopped at a wall terminal. His fingers flew over the controls as weapons fire struck the wall beside him. He accessed the ship's reactor controls, something only engineering staff and high-ranking officers should have been able to do. But Dehan had learned a few tricks during his years in the service. "What are you doing?" Princess Hana had stopped and was looking back at him. "I said run. Go." "Not without you." More Kresh were coming. Dehan could hear their hissing voices and the thunder of their footsteps. He entered the final command sequence and hit execute. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship. "Reactor overload detected," the computer announced calmly. "Catastrophic failure in 90 seconds. All personnel evacuate immediately." Dehan ran. Princess Hana was ahead of him, and he pushed himself to catch up. His lungs burned and his legs felt like lead, but he kept moving. Behind them, the Kresh realized what he had done and were screaming in rage. They reached escape pod 7 with 30 seconds to spare. Dehan shoved Princess Hana inside and slammed the door control. The pod systems activated automatically. "Wait!" Hana shouted. "You must come." But Dehan was already running back into the corridor. One of the Kresh had followed them and was raising its weapon. Dehan tackled the creature, driving it away from the escape pod. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. The Kresh was stronger than him, much stronger. Its claws raked across his chest, tearing through his uniform and into flesh. Dehan screamed in pain but didn't let go. He had to keep it away from the pod. Had to give Hana time to escape. His hand found his combat knife. He drove it upward, under the Kresh's jaw, through its mouth and into its brain. The creature shuddered and went still. Dehan rolled off the corpse and looked at the escape pod. Through the window, he could see Princess Hana's face pressed against the glass. She was shouting something, but he couldn't hear. The pod was already detaching. He smiled and raised his hand in a weak wave. The pod fired its thrusters and shot away from the ship. The reactor exploded. The last thing Dehan saw was a wall of white light rushing toward him. Then there was nothing but darkness and the sensation of flying through space. His body felt cold, so cold. He tried to breathe, but there was no air. "This is it," he thought. "Not a bad way to go. At least she's safe." Somewhere in the darkness, he felt something grab him. Strong arms wrapped around his broken body. A voice spoke in a language he didn't understand. Then even the darkness faded away, and Dehan knew nothing more. Dehan woke up to the sound of machines beeping softly around him. His entire body hurt, a deep ache that seemed to reach into his bones. He tried to open his eyes, but even that simple action took enormous effort. "He's waking up." The voice was unfamiliar, speaking in the chittering language of the Valan. A translator device rendered the words into Korean a moment later. Dehan finally managed to force his eyes open. The room was bright, too bright, and he had to blink several times before his vision cleared. He was in some kind of medical facility. Strange alien equipment surrounded his bed, and the walls were made of a smooth, organic-looking material that pulsed with faint light. A Valen doctor stood beside his bed, studying a holographic display. When she noticed he was awake, she leaned closer with two of her forearms. "Corporal Kim, you are very fortunate to be alive. When they brought you in, you had been exposed to vacuum for nearly 30 seconds. Your lungs were damaged. You had severe burns, multiple broken bones, and massive internal bleeding." Daehan tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. The doctor held a cup of water to his lips, and he drank gratefully. "Princess Hana?" he managed to croak. "She is safe. Thanks to you." The doctor's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. "She has been here every day, waiting for you to wake up. The entire Valen Empire knows what you did, Corporal. You are a hero." Before Daehan could respond, the door to the room slid open and Princess Hana entered. She looked different than he remembered. Instead of being covered in green blood and wounded, she now wore elaborate robes of silver and gold. But her eyes, those large, multifaceted eyes, held the same intensity. "Daehan." She approached his bed quickly. "You foolish, brave, impossible human. You nearly died. But I didn't, and neither did you." Hana made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. "No, neither of us did." She reached out with one of her hands and gently touched his arm. "My father, the Emperor, has declared you a defender of the crown. It is the highest honor we can give to a non-Valen. You will want for nothing for the rest of your life." Daehan shifted uncomfortably in the bed. "I don't need honors. I just did what anyone would do. That is where you are wrong." Hana's voice became serious. Most beings would not risk their lives for someone they barely know. Most would not sacrifice themselves for royalty of another species. What you did was extraordinary, and the galaxy is taking notice. Over the next few days, Daehan learned what she meant. News of his actions had spread across every world in the coalition. Humans were suddenly being viewed differently, not as weak newcomers who needed protection, but as beings capable of incredible courage. Diplomatic channels buzzed with activity. Trade agreements were being reconsidered. Military alliances were being proposed. But there was also danger. On his 4th day of recovery, a coalition diplomat arrived with troubling news. She was a tall, gray-skinned being from a species Daehan didn't recognize. "Corporal Kim, you have received a summons from Queen Nari of the Velcros Dominion." Daehan exchanged glances with Princess Hana, who had been visiting him. "What does the Velcros Queen want with me?" The diplomat's expression was grave. "We don't know. But refusing her summons would be considered a grave insult. The Velcros are difficult. They value strength and honor above all else. They have been rivals with the Valen Empire for centuries." "This is a political maneuver," Hana said sharply. "Nari sees an opportunity to cause problems between my people and humanity." "Perhaps," the diplomat agreed. "But you must go, Corporal. The alternative is unthinkable." Daehan was cleared to leave the medical facility 2 days later. To his surprise, Princess Hana announced that she would accompany him to Velcros Prime, the homeworld of Queen Nari's people. "You don't have to do this," Daehan told her as they prepared to board the diplomatic ship. "This could cause problems for you. You risked your life for me. The least I can do is stand beside you now." Hana's mandibles clicked firmly. "Besides, I am curious what Nari wants. The Velcros are warriors. They respect courage. Your actions would have impressed them." The journey to Velcros Prime took 5 days. During that time, Daehan and Hana spent long hours talking. She told him about the Valen Empire, about the complex politics between different species in the coalition, about her own struggles as a princess who wanted to make real changes but was constrained by tradition. "My people see humans as interesting but weak. She admitted one evening as they sat in the observation deck, watching stars stream past. "We value physical strength, and compared to most species in the galaxy, humans are fragile. But you proved that strength comes in many forms." "I was scared the entire time," Daehyun confessed. "When those Kresh soldiers attacked, all I could think was that I was going to die. But you fought anyway. That is true courage acting despite fear, not because you lack it." When they finally arrived at Velcros Prime, Daehyun understood why the Velcros were known as warriors. Their planet was beautiful but savage. Massive crystal formations jutted from the ground like teeth. Dense forests covered much of the surface, filled with dangerous predators. The cities were built to blend with the landscape, as if the Velcros refused to be separated from nature even in their urban centers. The capital city, Krishen, was stunning. Buildings made of crystalline materials rose toward the sky, but between them were gardens and parks where wild creatures roamed freely. Daehyun saw Velcro citizens walking alongside massive feline beasts that looked like they could tear a person apart. The Velcros believed that civilization should not come at the cost of losing their primal nature, Hana explained. "They are hunters and warriors first, diplomats second." They were taken to the royal palace, an enormous structure that seemed to grow from the mountainside itself. Guards lined the corridors, tall, powerful beings covered in fur that ranged from gold to deep black. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and Daehyun could see the predatory intelligence in those gazes. Finally, they were brought into the throne room. It was a vast space, open on one side to the wilderness beyond. The wind carried the scent of forests and distant rain. Queen Nari sat on a throne made of white stone and precious metals. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Nearly 8 feet tall, with fur the color of midnight and eyes that glowed amber like fire. When she stood to greet them, Daehyun felt a primal fear response, every instinct screaming that he was in the presence of an apex predator. "Corporal Daehyun Kim." Her voice was deep and resonant, carrying power that made his bones vibrate. "I have been eager to meet you, Your Majesty." Daehyun bowed, though he wasn't sure if that was the right protocol. Nari's lips pulled back, revealing sharp teeth in what might have been a smile. "Princess Hana, it is unexpected to see you here. Does your father know you traveled to the homeworld of your people's rivals?" "He knows." Hana stepped forward, showing no fear. "Corporal Kim is under the protection of the Valen Empire. I have no intention of harming him." Nari circled them slowly, her movements graceful and controlled. "In fact, I wish to honor him. His actions on the Horizon's Promise demonstrate qualities the Velcros admire: courage, sacrifice, the willingness to face death for a cause greater than oneself." She stopped in front of Daehyun, towering over him. "I have a proposition for you, human. Become my champion. Serve the Velcros Dominion, and I will ensure that humanity gains power and influence beyond anything you currently possess. You will be honored, celebrated, given wealth and status." Daehyun felt his stomach drop. This was the trap. Accept, and he would betray Princess Hana and the Valen. Refuse, and he might start a war. "I need time to think," he said carefully. Nari's eyes gleamed. "Of course. You are my guest. Take all the time you need. But understand this, Corporal, the galaxy is watching. Your choice will shape the future of your entire species." That night, in the quarters provided for them, Daehyun and Hana talked late into the night. They both knew that whatever he decided in the coming days would change everything. Daehyun couldn't sleep. He stood on the balcony of his quarters, looking out over the wild landscape of Velcros Prime. 3 moons hung in the sky, casting strange shadows across the forest below. Somewhere in the distance, a creature howled a sound both beautiful and terrifying. You should rest. Princess Hana emerged from her own room, joining him on the balcony. Tomorrow will be difficult. I keep thinking about what accepting would mean. For humanity, it could change everything. We can have real power in the coalition instead of being seen as the newest, weakest members. But it would require betraying me and my people. Hana's voice was gentle, without accusation. I understand the dilemma. Daehyun turned to face her. In the moonlight, her chitinous features seemed almost human. He could see intelligence and emotion in those alien eyes. I can't do it, Hana. I can't betray you after everything. Even if it means humanity stays weak, even if it means I'm passing up this opportunity. It's not right. Something in Hana's posture changed, became softer. That is why you are remarkable, Daehyun. Most beings would choose power. They would rationalize it, say they were doing it for the greater good. But you, she reached out and touched his face with one of her hands. The gesture was awkward. Her species didn't have the same concept of physical affection, but he understood the meaning. You choose loyalty over advantage, honor over ambition. Before Daehyun could respond, an explosion rocked the palace. Alarms began shrieking. Hana grabbed his arm and pulled him back inside as debris rained down from the ceiling. We're under attack. A Valkyros guard burst into the room, her fur singed and smoking. Kresh, infiltrators. They're targeting the banquet hall where Queen Nari is hosting diplomatic guests. Move! Daehyun and Hana ran through the corridors, following the guard. More explosions shook the palace. They could hear weapons fire and screaming. When they reached the banquet hall, they found chaos. The beautiful room had been transformed into a battlefield. Kresh soldiers in heavy armor were fighting against Valkyros guards. Diplomats from dozens of species cowered behind overturned tables. And in the center of it all, Queen Nari fought like a demon. She moved with terrifying speed, her claws tearing through Kresh armor as if it were paper. 2 enemies lay dead at her feet, and 3 more were trying to surround her. But even the mighty queen couldn't be everywhere at once. More Kresh were pouring in through breached walls, and some were targeting the helpless diplomats. Daehyun didn't hesitate. He grabbed a rifle from a fallen guard and charged into the fight. He fired controlled bursts, taking down 2 Kresh who were about to execute a group of trapped civilians. Beside him, Princess Hana moved with deadly grace, her forearms wielding a blade in each hand. The 2 of them worked together instinctively. When Daehyun needed to reload, Hana covered him. When she was pressed by multiple enemies, he drew them away with carefully placed shots. They moved as if they had trained together for years, each anticipating the other's actions. Behind you, Hana shouted. Daehyun spun and fired, dropping a Kresh that had tried to flank him. He saw Queen Nari fighting 3 enemies at once, her movements a blur of claws and teeth. One of the Kresh landed a lucky hit, slashing across her shoulder. Green blood sprayed, but Nari didn't slow down. She grabbed the offending Kresh by the head and twisted, snapping its neck with a sickening crack. More guards arrived, and slowly the tide turned. The Kresh, realizing they were losing, tried to retreat. But Queen Nari was merciless. She hunted them down, killing each one personally. When the last enemy fell, the banquet hall was silent except for the groans of the wounded and the crackling of small fires. Nari stood in the center of the carnage, breathing heavily. Blood dripped from her claws, both her own and that of her enemies. She looked at Daehyun and Hana with those burning amber eyes. You fought, well, both of you. She limped toward them, pressing a hand against the wound on her shoulder. You could have fled. Many did. But you stayed and fought. That's what soldiers do, Daehyun said simply. Nari studied him for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been laughter. Yes, that is what soldiers do. She gestured to her guards. Find whoever is responsible for this attack. I want answers. Over the next 2 days, Velcro's intelligence agents worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Daehyun and Hana were given access to the investigation, along with a Velcro's officer named Taejun, a scarred veteran with one eye replaced by a cybernetic implant. The Kresh didn't plan this alone. Taejun told them, displaying holographic evidence. Their equipment was too advanced. Their intelligence too precise. Someone with access to palace security codes helped them. An inside job? Hana's mandibles clicked in distress. That means someone within the coalition wanted this attack to succeed. But why? Daehyun studied the data. What did they gain from killing diplomats and starting a war? The answer came when they traced the source of the Kresh funding. The credits had been funneled through dozens of shell companies and dummy accounts. But eventually, the trail led back to high-ranking officials in both the Valen Empire and the Velcros Dominion. A Valen noble and a Velcros general, Taejun said grimly. They've been working together secretly for years. That's impossible. Hana stared at the evidence in disbelief. Our people have been rivals for centuries. Why would they cooperate? Because they both fear the same thing, Daehyun said, understanding dawning. They fear humanity. They fear what happens when humans become more powerful and change the balance of the galaxy. Taejun nodded. Exactly. These conspirators wanted to spark a war between our peoples. With the Valen and Velcros fighting each other, neither would have time to ally with humanity. Your species would remain weak and isolated. And the attack on the Horizon's promise? Hana asked quietly. Meant to kill you, princess, and blame it on anti-Valen extremists. The conspirators wanted to destabilize your empire and prevent any alliance with humans. Taejun pulled up more files. We've identified at least a dozen high-ranking officials across multiple species who are part of this conspiracy. They call themselves the Preservation Council. They believe that humanity's rapid rise threatens the established order of the galaxy. Daehyun felt cold anger building in his chest. All of this, the attacks, the deaths, the manipulation, because some powerful beings were afraid of change. Afraid that humans might actually matter. We need to tell Queen Nari, he said. When they presented the evidence to the Queen, her reaction was terrifying. Her fur stood on end and her eyes blazed with fury. Treason. General Kyo has betrayed the Dominion. She turned to Daehyun and Hana. And this Valor noble, Lord Vec, has betrayed your empire as well, princess. What will you do? Hana asked. What I must. Nari stood, her full height imposing. But first, I owe you both an apology. And an explanation. She gestured for them to sit. My offer to you, Corporal Kim, was a test. I wanted to see if you could be corrupted by power and status. Many beings can be bought with promises of greatness. And if I had accepted, I would have given you exactly what I promised. But I also would have known that you were not the man I hoped you were. Nari's expression softened slightly. You passed the test. You chose loyalty and honor over personal gain. That tells me everything I need to know about you and your species. She turned to include Princess Hana in her gaze. I have a different proposal. Not one that benefits only the Velcros, but one that could change the galaxy. What if our three peoples, the Valor, the Velcros, and humanity formed an alliance? A true alliance, not based on dominance, but on mutual respect? Hana's eyes widened. Such a thing has never been done. The Valen and Velcros have been enemies for too long, Nari interrupted. These conspirators fear humanity because they represent change. Perhaps it is time for change. Perhaps it is time for old enemies to become allies. Daehyun looked between the two powerful females. One insectoid, one feline, both representing ancient civilizations that had never found common ground. And somehow, A human soldier had become the bridge between them. "It won't be easy," he said. "There will be opposition. People who don't want peace. Then we will deal with them," Nari said. "Together." But before they could discuss further, alarms screamed through the palace again. Taejun burst into the room, his face grave. "The conspirators know we've exposed them. They're making their move. General Kyo has activated secret military assets throughout the city. He's launching a coup." Nari's expression became deadly. "Then we will crush him. Prepare for battle." The palace shook as artillery fire struck the outer walls. Daehyun followed Queen Nari and Princess Hana through the command center, where Velcro's officers shouted reports over the chaos. "General Kyo has seized control of the 3rd and 7th battalions," one officer reported. "They're advancing on the palace from 3 directions. We also have reports of Valorn military vessels entering orbit Lord Vec's forces. So they're working together openly now," Hana said bitterly. "My own people attacking me," Nari growled, a sound that made Daehyun's hair stand on end. "How many loyal troops do we have?" 2 battalions of palace guards, Your Majesty. Maybe 3,000 soldiers. The enemy has at least 10,000, plus air support and heavy armor. We're outnumbered 3 to 1, Taejun said grimly. He stood beside Daehyun, checking his weapon. "This is going to be ugly." Daehyun's mind raced. 3 to 1 odds. Heavy armor. Air support. Everything about this situation screamed that they should lose. But he had learned something during his years as a soldier. Sometimes, the side with fewer numbers could win if they were smarter, faster, and more creative. "Your Majesty, I have an idea. But you're not going to like it." Nari turned those blazing amber eyes on him. "Speak." "The enemy has superior numbers and equipment. We can't beat them in a straight fight. But we don't have to. We just need to hold long enough for coalition reinforcements to arrive." He pulled up a holographic map of the city. "General Kyo expects us to defend the palace directly. Instead, we let them come close, then hit them from unexpected angles using the city itself." "You want to use guerrilla tactics?" Taejun looked skeptical. "Against trained military forces? Why not? The enemy is arrogant. They think they've already won. We use that against them." Daehyun highlighted several locations on the map. "Small strike teams here, and here. We target their supply lines, their communication networks. Make them paranoid. Force them to spread out their forces to protect against attacks from every direction." "It's risky," Nari said slowly, "but it might work. The conspirators want a quick victory, something they can present to the galaxy as a necessary action. If we can drag this out, make it messy and complicated, they lose their narrative." "Exactly. And humans are good at messy and complicated." Nari's lips pulled back in a fierce grin. "Very well, Corporal. I am putting you in command of tactical operations. Coordinate with Taejun. Show these traitors why they should have feared humanity." The next hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Daehyun organized the defenders into small, mobile teams. He used every trick he had learned during his military training, plus a few he invented on the spot. Princess Hana proved invaluable. She knew the city well and could predict how Valon forces would move and think. "Lord Vec is cautious," she explained as they planned their strategy. "He'll send scouts before committing his main forces. If we can eliminate those scouts, we can blind him." "Good. Taejun, take a team and set up ambush points on the main approach roads. Use the terrain, force them into kill zones." The fighting began as enemy forces pushed into the outer districts of the city. But instead of finding a traditional defensive line, they encountered something far more frustrating. Small teams of defenders would attack, inflict casualties, and disappear before the enemy could respond. Supply convoys were ambushed. Communication towers were sabotaged. Officers were targeted by precision strikes. Daehyun commanded the operation from a mobile command post, moving every hour to avoid being located. He watched the tactical displays, orchestrating the defense like a deadly game of chess. Enemy armor column approaching Sector 7, an officer reported. Send Team 3 to hit them from the north. Have Team 5 create a distraction to the south. Once the armor turns to engage Team 5, Team 3 hits their rear with anti-tank weapons and retreats before they can respond. It worked. The armor column was decimated, and the enemy started becoming more cautious, more spread out. They were winning the tactical game but losing precious time. However, General Kyo was not a fool. After 6 hours of frustrating guerrilla attacks, he changed tactics. Instead of pushing into the city, he began bombardment from a distance. Artillery shells rained down on civilian areas, forcing Daehyun to divert resources to protect innocent people. He's trying to draw us out, Princess Hana said. They were in a reinforced bunker now, with wounded being treated around them. He knows we won't let civilians die. Then we need to take out his artillery. Daehyun studied the map. The enemy artillery positions were heavily guarded, positioned on high ground outside the city. A direct assault would be suicide. Taejun limped into the command center, his arm in a makeshift sling. I'll do it. Give me 20 soldiers, and I can reach those artillery positions through the old mining tunnels. They probably don't even know those tunnels exist. That's insane, Daehyun said. Even if you reach the positions, you'll be trapped. There's no way out. Then I'll die doing something important. Taejun's good eye was steady, unafraid. That's what soldiers do, right? What you taught us, Corporal. Sometimes you have to risk everything for others. Daehyun wanted to argue, but he knew Taejun was right. Without taking out that artillery, the city would be destroyed and thousands would die. Okay, but I'm coming with you. No, Queen Nari's voice cut through the discussion. She entered the command center, her fur matted with dried blood from earlier fighting. Corporal Kim, you are needed here. Taejun, I will accompany you instead. Your Majesty, you can't, Taejun started. I can, and I will. You think I became queen by hiding in safety while my people fight? Nari's tone allowed no argument. Besides, Corporal Kim is right that this mission is likely one way. Better that I risk myself than both of you. Before they could argue further, another urgent report came in. We've broken the enemy communication encryption. They're planning a final assault in 2 hours. Everything they have, straight at the palace. They want to capture or kill Queen Nari before coalition reinforcements arrive. Then we don't have time to debate, Nari said. Taejun, gather your team. We leave in 10 minutes. Princess Hana stepped forward. I'm going too. No. Daehyun and Nari said simultaneously. Yes, Hana said firmly. Lord Vec is out there somewhere, commanding the Valen forces. He knows me. If I can reach him, speak to him, perhaps I can convince some of the Valen soldiers to stand down. Many of them were loyal to me before this madness started. She had a point. Daehyun hated it, but she had a point. Fine, but you stay behind our lines until we've secured the artillery positions. Agreed? Agreed. The mission was launched 30 minutes later. Daehyun watched them go. Nari, Taejun, Princess Hana, and 20 brave soldiers disappearing into the ancient tunnels beneath the city. Then he turned back to his tactical displays and prepared for the coming assault. The enemy attacked exactly when predicted, throwing everything at the palace. Wave after wave of soldiers, supported by armor and airstrikes. Daehyun coordinated the defense brilliantly, using every trick and tactic he knew. The defenders fought like demons, making the enemy pay for every meter of ground. But they were being pushed back. Slowly, inevitably, the defensive perimeter was shrinking. Daehyun was in the thick of it now, rifle in hand, fighting alongside Velcro soldiers who no longer saw him as a weak human, but as their commander. Then, just when it seemed the palace would fall, the artillery stopped firing. In the sudden silence, Daehyun allowed himself a moment of hope. Nari and Taejun had done it. A minute later, his communicator crackled to life. It was Taevyun's voice, weak and pained. "Corporal, we got them. All artillery positions destroyed." But there was a pause, and Daehyun's chest tightened. "Queen Nari is down. She's alive but badly wounded. And Princess Hana." Another pause. "She did it. She convinced half the Valen forces to switch sides. Lord Vec is dead, killed by his own soldiers when they realized what he'd done. What about you, Taejun?" "I'm not going to make it, Corporal. But I wanted to tell you thank you. You showed us that courage isn't about being the strongest or the toughest. It's about doing what's right, even when it terrifies you. That's a lesson I'll carry wherever I'm going next." "Jun, hold on. We'll get medical. No time. The enemy's falling apart. General Kyo just retreated. You've won. Now finish this. Make sure we didn't die for nothing." The connection went dead. Daehyun stood there for a moment, grief and fury warring in his chest. Then he pushed both emotions aside and got back to work. There was still a battle to win. The dawn broke over Velcro's prime, painting the damaged city in shades of gold and crimson. Daehyun stood on the palace balcony, watching coalition ships descend through the atmosphere. They had arrived too late to help with the fighting, but just in time to witness the aftermath. Behind him, medical teams worked frantically to save Queen Nari. The doctors said she would survive, but recovery would take months. She had sustained terrible injuries during the tunnel assault, burns, broken bones, and massive blood loss. But she had accomplished her mission. The artillery was destroyed, and General Kyo's forces had scattered when their support vanished. General Kyo himself had been captured trying to flee the planet. He would face trial for treason, along with the other conspirators who had survived. Many had not when their plot collapsed. Some had chosen death rather than face justice. "You should rest." Princess Hana approached, her movements slower than usual. She too had been wounded during the fighting, though she refused to let anyone treat her until all the critically injured had been cared for. "You haven't slept in 2 days. Neither have you. I am Valen. We can function longer without sleep than humans." But her voice was tired, and Daehyun could see the exhaustion in her posture. "How many did we lose?" he asked quietly. 437 defenders. 812 civilians. Hana's voice was heavy with grief. "The enemy lost over 3,000. And Taejun." She paused, and Daehyun saw genuine sadness in her alien features. He was a good soldier. A good person. They stood in silence for a moment, honoring the dead. Then a Velcro's medical officer emerged from the treatment room. "Queen Nari is asking for you both." They found the queen lying in a medical bed, her body covered in bandages and connected to various alien machines. But her eyes were still fierce, still burning with that inner fire. "You look terrible, both of you," she said, her voice weak but amused. "You're one to talk, Your Majesty," Daehyun replied. Nari made a sound that might have been laughter but turned into a cough. When she recovered, she gestured for them to come closer. "The coalition has demanded a full investigation. They're sending representatives from 50 different species to understand what happened here." "Good," Hana said. "Let them see what fear and hatred can accomplish. Let them see how close we came to war. They'll also see what courage and unity can accomplish," Nari countered. "A human, a Valen, and a Velcros working together to stop a conspiracy that threatened the entire galaxy." She looked at Daehyung with those amber eyes. You proved something important, Corporal. You proved that humans belong in the coalition, not as weak newcomers to be protected, but as equals who can stand beside anyone. Over the next weeks, as Queen Nari recovered, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. The Preservation Council had infiltrated dozens of governments across the galaxy. Their goal had been simple: keep humanity weak and divided, prevent any major species from allying with them, and maintain the status quo where they held power. But their plan had failed because of one human soldier who refused to let a princess die. One soldier who chose honor over advantage, loyalty over power, courage over safety. The irony was not lost on anyone. The trial of the conspirators became the biggest news in the galaxy. Every day, new evidence was presented, new connections revealed. High-ranking officials in multiple governments were arrested. Trade agreements were canceled. Military officers were discharged. The scandal shook the coalition to its core. Through it all, Daehyun found himself thrust into a role he never wanted, that of a public figure. Journalists from 1,000 worlds wanted interviews. Diplomats sought his opinion on galactic policy. Military strategists wanted to study his tactics during the defense of the palace. "You're famous," Princess Hana told him one evening. They were walking through the palace gardens, which were slowly being repaired after the battle. "The human who changed the galaxy. I don't feel like I changed anything. I just did what needed to be done." "That's exactly why you changed everything." Hana stopped walking and turned to face him. Most beings in positions of power make decisions based on what benefits them personally. You made decisions based on what was right. That's revolutionary. Queen Nari, now recovered enough to move around with assistants, joined them in the garden. She moved slowly, still healing, but her presence was as commanding as ever. "The Valorn Emperor has sent a message," she announced. "He proposes a formal alliance between our three peoples, the Valorn Empire, the Velcros Dominion, and humanity. The Tripartite Accord, he calls it." "My father rarely moves this quickly," Hana said, surprised. "He must be serious." "We all are. The conspiracy showed us that our old rivalries serve no one but our enemies. It's time for a new path." Nari looked at Daehyun. "And I believe you should be the one to lead it." "Me? I'm just a soldier." "You're more than that now. You're a symbol proof that different species can work together, trust each other, even love each other." Nari's voice was gentle. "We want to make you the first joint ambassador of the Tripartite Accord. You would represent all three peoples to the broader coalition." Daehyun felt overwhelmed. "I don't know if I'm qualified for that." "You're the most qualified person in the galaxy," Hana said softly. "Because you don't want the power. You just want to do what's right." The formal signing of the Tripartite Accord took place 3 months later. Representatives from every coalition species attended the ceremony, held on a neutral station orbiting a beautiful blue-green planet. The station's grand hall had been decorated with symbols from all three cultures: Valorn silver and gold, Velcros crystals and fur, and human flags bearing the colors of Earth. Daehyun stood between Princess Hana and Queen Nari as the treaty was signed. He wore a formal uniform that combined elements from all three military traditions. Cameras broadcast the moment to billions of viewers across the galaxy. The Valorn Emperor spoke first, his chittering voice translated for the masses. "Today, we set aside centuries of mistrust and conflict. Today, we acknowledge that strength comes not from isolation, but from unity. The Tripartite Accord is more than a treaty. It is a statement that the old ways are ending and something new is beginning." Queen Nari spoke next, her deep voice resonating through the hall. "The Velcros have always prided ourselves on our strength, our warrior traditions. But we have learned that true strength means standing beside those who share your values, even if they are different from you. Especially if they are different from you. When it was time for the human representative to speak, all eyes turned to Daehyun. He had prepared a speech, worked on it for weeks with advisors and diplomats. But standing there, looking out at the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds, he set aside his notes. A few months ago, I was just a soldier doing my job. I didn't think about galactic politics or ancient rivalries. I just saw someone who needed help, and I helped them. That's all. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Humans aren't the strongest species. We're not the fastest or the smartest. We don't have the best technology or the longest history. But we have something that I think matters. We care. We care about others, even when it's inconvenient. We form bonds with people who are different from us. We believe that everyone deserves a chance. He looked at Princess Hana and Queen Nari, these two remarkable females from species that had been enemies. These two leaders taught me that the galaxy is better when we work together, when we see past our differences and find common ground. The Tripartite Accord isn't just about three species forming an alliance. It's about proving that peace is possible, that old hatreds can be overcome, that the future can be better than the past. The applause that followed was deafening. But what mattered more to Daehyun were the faces of Hana and Nari, both showing pride and something deeper, something that transcended species and culture. In the months that followed, Daehyun threw himself into his work as joint ambassador. He established protocols for joint military operations between the three species. He mediated disputes and facilitated cultural exchanges. He became a voice for smaller, weaker species who felt marginalized by the coalition's power structures. It wasn't easy. There were beings who resented the Tripartite Accord, who saw it as a threat to their own interests. There were assassination attempts, 3 in the first year alone. There were diplomatic crises and political maneuvering and endless challenges. But Daehyun wasn't alone. Princess Hana returned to the Valen Empire, where she used her newfound influence to push for reforms and closer cooperation with humanity. She became a fierce advocate for human rights within the coalition, arguing that all species deserved equal representation and respect. Queen Nari, fully recovered from her injuries, began a campaign to modernize Velcro society. She established educational exchange programs, brought human and Valen advisors into her government, and worked to dismantle the old prejudices that had defined her people for so long. The three of them remained close, communicating daily despite the vast distances between their worlds. What had started as a bond forged in crisis had become genuine friendship and perhaps something more, though none of them spoke openly about the deeper feelings that had developed. 1 year after the signing of the Tripartite Accord,